Did Apollo 11 land on the moon on July 20th, 1969?
Was Stanley Kubrick a part of the biggest cover-up in history?
Were there clues that even prove his involvement?
If we did make it to the moon, what the heck happened?
And why did we suddenly stop boldly exploring space shortly after the Apollo missions?
All this and more on today's episode of The Edge of Wonder.
So I'm your host, Ben.
And I'm Rob.
In September of 2002, Buzz Aldrin punched conspiracy theorist Bart Sibrel in the face. Sibrel accused Aldrin of lying about going to the moon.
So what are the implications of this slick right cross by an already elderly Buzz Aldrin? Did Bart provoke that punch by calling Buzz a coward and a liar and a thief? What really happened on the moon? Before we begin, make sure to click that subscribe button and bell so you don't miss our videos every week. It's gonna get crazy. Ben, the moon is a crazy place. Don't believe us? Watch our previous moon video and get your mind blown. But today we're gonna focus on something very specific, the Apollo 11 moon landing.
It all goes back to July 20th, 1969. The one giant leap for mankind that changed the world forever.
America did it! We beat the Russians to the moon. We were winning the Cold War.
Or was that giant leap created by Stanley Kubrick in the MGM studios in Boreham Wood, UK?
Okay, let's put all this on the table, but first let's talk Stanley. Stanley, our boy Stanley. Now keep watching if you want to know what actually happened on the moon.
So you guys might be asking, let's hear it. Did Kubrick in fact film moon footage for the Apollo moon landing?
The answer is yes, definitely. But keep watching to understand why and how it was used.
Have you looked into Stanley Kubrick as much as Rob and I have?
If you did, you'd know that Stanley Kubrick is probably one of the most meticulous directors of all time.
So Stanley had an IQ of 200.
I mean, Stephen Hawking had a 160 IQ, I think, right?
That's crazy,
right?
I know. So this dude was so smart that he actually got bored with filmmaking, probably until he directed a little movie you might have all heard of
called The Shining. Probably the most layered with meaning movie ever.
So if you watch the documentary Room 237, there's about a 10-minute portion of the film that focuses on the Apollo 11 landing.
In the doc, Jay Weidner translates scenes that Kubrick directed in the film, and we have to say, the evidence is pretty undeniable that Kubrick was involved. However, we don't think the way Jay portrays this is kind of the 100% full story.
Okay, so let's go over what we know and the facts, because after researching this and cross-referencing, we have our own understanding of what we think kind of happened.
Okay, so the scene in The Shining goes like this. Danny's playing with his trucks in the weird freaky hotel. He stands up from a hexagonal pattern in the floor wearing Apollo 11 rocket shirt. Danny standing is Apollo 11 taking off.
After Danny takes off, he goes where? To figure out what horrors lie in room 237. But in the original Stephen King books, the room is 217. So why the random change?
Stanley Kubrick said that the reason for this change is that the Mount Hood Resort was worried that guests wouldn't want to stay in room 217 after the freaky film he was directing, so he changed it to 237.
But if you go through all the trouble and call up the resort, you'll find out that there is no room 217. So why would Stanley lie about that? And what's the significance of the number 237?
Well, at the time, the measurement of the Earth to the moon averaged 237,000 miles. Room 237 is the moon room.
So Stanley's attention to detail here tells the whole story. The capital letters on the key left in the door spell two words if you shift them around. Moon and room. Crazy.
If you think this is stretching it, then you really don't understand how Stanley directs films. Before filming The Shining, Stanley met with advertising firms to understand better how to create scenes for the subconscious mind.
In fact, anytime Stanley deviated from the Stephen King story, it was intentional, and he did it to tell his own stories. In this case, a story that he was silenced from telling.
So Ben, to go along with your point, everyone knows the bat scene in The Shining, right? When Jack in the movie is talking to his wife, Wendy, and he says strange things to her, right?
Have you ever thought about my responsibilities? Have you ever thought for a single moment my responsibilities?
Okay, Ben, let's Let's just not torture our audience and let them watch short clip.
Don't like my version of Jack Nicklaus here.
Ben, you can't handle the truth.
Ever thought about my responsibilities?
Oh, Dick, what are you talking about?
Have you ever had a single moment's thought about my responsibilities?
You know what's interesting about that scene, though? He's going like this the whole time. And
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah, it
you
is.
know,
That's the Illuminati sign, right?
Supposedly, you know. All
right.
Maybe that's another reference to it. Okay, guys, there was a lot of other symbols in the movie, but we have to move things along. So also note that there's Tang in the background of many scenes in the hotel. Tang was something that was known to be taken into space on the moon missions.
So what exactly happened? Y'alls might be aware that Stanley Kubrick's daughter vehemently denied Stanley Kubrick's involvement with the Apollo 11 cover-up, saying that he was too principled and would never do that.
I mean, that whole thing is very complicated. I mean, let's hear our friend Ken Johnston had to say regarding Stanley.
You have to understand it. At that time, we were in the middle of the Cold War with Russia, right? And it was a race to get to the moon technology. All right, and who's the big movie guy that everybody...
So Stanley Kubrick is the one that everyone made this movie.
Yes. Now, Stanley and them did create a backup movie of the success of us landing on the moon and doing all of these fun things in the event that we failed, okay, that we can prove we got there and did it. Now what happened is those fake movies, some people got a hold of that. Oh, you never went to the moon.
Okay, so this is starting to make way more sense, right? Stanley created that footage in the event the moon landings failed.
Or was he forced to? But we also contact our friend John D'Souza about a couple things.
So this is what John D'Souza told us. Quote, the US had two twin actions that went forward, the real moon landing and the faked moon landing with Kubrick that was piped in the secret space program. All the film and the pics that were used afterward were from the fake landing. That's why there are so many inconsistencies in all the pics and film. Yet NASA was really firing on all pistons with the real moon landing that went forward, but all the actual film and pics from that true landing were suppressed.
Next, let's see what Brett Shepard, a friend of Ken's, had to say about it.
They do not want you to know what is on the moon, so of course they're going to hide it. So a lot of our actual landing images were done in a studio. We do have a lot of fake images. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter uses complete CGI graphics to make their images at the university. They were contracted to do that.
But officially, we landed on the moon.
Officially, we not only landed on the moon, but we're still there.
All right. So I asked John D'Souza about Vivian Kubrick, his daughter's denial of Stanley's involvement, and he had this to say.
It's not like he, Kubrick, had a choice in the matter. Ironically, his daughter's life is probably the lever they used to force him to use his talents for this Black Ops mission, and was the continuing lever to keep his mouth shut. Just like all the astronauts at the press conference afterward who looked like and sounded like they were at a funeral.
That was a loaded quote, man.
It's crazy.
All right, so basically, you have to understand, if Stanley was asked or forced to do this, he would have been sworn to silence because of the extreme confidentiality of the issue. And now for our unveiling of what actually happened on the moon, and keep watching to understand how all this ties together.
So you may be asking yourself, but Ben and Rob, who cares about Stanley? What the heck actually happened on the moon?
Yeah, we don't care about Stanley. I mean, not that much. Well, it's not an easy thing to answer. What we do know is that absolutely, yes, indeed, for sure, we went to the moon. Sorry, flat earthers, but we did.
And not only did we go to the moon, but as Brett said, we're probably still there.
So what happened during Apollo 11 and even up to Apollo 17? Let's reference a few people here. One is William Tompkins, who was a top NASA aerospace designer for TRW at the time of the Apollo era and happens to be one of the most significant whistleblowers of all time. I didn't even know that until we started researching this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The next insider is Corey Good, and finally we'll reference Dr. Michael Salla. We'll even throw in a little Buzz Aldrin for good measure.
Yeah, I want to see another one of those right crosses, you know? All right, let's start with Tompkins' account. You guys ever heard of the space program called NOVA? I'm guessing not, because we didn't.
No, that's for sure. So NOVA was a 4-stage operation carried out through the Apollo missions. Stage 1 was to get people to the moon. Stage 2 was to put 10,000 people on the moon.
That's crazy. Stage 3 was to place bases on Mars and other local planetary bodies in our solar system. And Stage 4 was to place manned Navy bases in 12 adjoining star systems. What? This was the 1960s, people.
So first things first, let's get to the moon, right? Rob and I are going to take some time at the end of this to tell you, with all the data we found, what we actually think happened. But in this part, we're going to do our best to just stick with the accounts from the insiders.
Right, so make sure to watch our wrap up at the end of this video.
The Edge of Wonder.
Next, let's discuss William Tompkins. William Tompkins was there when Apollo touched down in the NASA control room.
He was interviewed many times and happened to publish a book in 2015 before he died at the age of 94.
The book is called Selected by Extraterrestrials, if you want some light reading before bed.
Bill provides not only a story, but significant documents and drawings of what happened in his book.
Tompkins recounts in his book that when Armstrong touched down, took his first step, and looked up to the edge of the Sea of Tranquility crater, ironically called that, he said, "There are other ships here. They are enormous." The public did not hear that statement or see the massive alien starships. Armstrong panned his camera in a 360-degree motion all around the crater, and the CIA then classified the information as way above top secret. This was in Selected by Extraterrestrials, page 418.
So Tompkins, being an aerospace designer, recounted what happened with a drawing we'll show you now. The likelihood of this drawing being accurate as to what the ships look like is extremely likely, since Tompkins' job was industrial aerospace design.
Tompkins goes on in his book to state that, quote, "The extraterrestrials put up their no trespassing sign, but allowed us to make several other additional Apollo landings to pick up a few rocks and play in the sand. The action of the extraterrestrials stopped our plans to build a manned naval base on the moon." This is in Selected by Extraterrestrials, page 428.
On an episode of Cosmic Disclosure on the Gaia series, David Wilcock asked Corey Goode, known whistleblower and member of the Secret Space Program, if Tompkins' account checks out. Goode replies by saying that the Apollo crew landed in an area that was sensitive.
He also said they came out in a number of large ships to intimidate, and when the astronauts gathered the rocks, did a few of their experiments, and went to leave orbit, one of these vessels escorted them away.
It's so crazy. So, can you imagine how terrifying it would be to go there and get surrounded by unexpected, highly advanced, enormous ships? They actually escorted them off the moon. Guys, they were asked not to come back after they finished a few of their missions.
So when Corey was asked who exactly visited them to say not to come back to the moon, Corey makes it clear that it was an extraterrestrial, but it wasn't clear who or what this being looked like. I'm sure he was just briefed or something like that.
Right. So our friend Dr. Michael Salla also looked into this and has several articles on his website that presents Tompkins' information in a very easy and digestible way. We'll put the link below in the description box for you guys.
So Dr. Salla also had an article that shows UFOs watching moonwalkers during the Apollo 15 moon landing when we were, quote, allowed to pick up a few rocks and play in the sand.
The funny thing is that aside from the screenshots that Dr. Salla provides, when we check the links to the videos that leaked showing these things, they've all been taken down.
Of course, there's a surprise, not mysterious at all, and it begs the question, why'd they get taken down if they weren't real? It was even impossible to check who the original channel was that posted it and why they were taken down or inquire any further.
Buzz Aldrin is known to have said on multiple occasions that he and Neil definitely saw something outside the ship when they were on the way to the moon.
Tompkins corroborated this by saying that a ship pulled up beside Apollo 11 on its way to the moon and that the public didn't hear these statements made by astronauts.
Was Buzz only telling us a small part? So let's patch all of this together and tell you what we think happened based on our evidence and everything that we've been looking at.
Okay guys, so here it goes. Stanley was contacted to do the video because coming off of directing 2001 Space Odyssey, he was literally the only director on the planet that could pull off faking the moon landing.
Being principled, Stanley flat out refused. But they managed to convince him, or probably forced him or coerced him to do this, to shoot the footage.
The footage was shot and used as a backup for the moon landings, in case the actual moon landings were not successful. Why? The Cold War. We had to beat the Russians, y'all.
We think Stanley absolutely shot something, probably sort of against his will, and was sworn to secrecy.
His daughter denies this, of course, because how would she know?
Right.
Every confidential document we've read shows what happens to people if they talk. It becomes a matter of national security.
Even if Stanley generally was very open with his daughter about most things, if it was something that would put their lives in danger, do you think he would risk telling her? Stanley being upset over all of this definitely let out all of his rage in The Shining, which you can watch for yourself. The places he deviated from Stephen King's source material tell his own stories.
Now for the moon landings. Everything we saw was staged. How it was staged, or where and when, is another thing entirely.
Yeah. See, Rob and I think that the footage you saw during the moon landing was real. We're open to it being faked and faked by Stanley, but ultimately it's not the important factor of this whole whopping story.
What is important is that from our sources, you know that we definitely, without a doubt, went to the moon. It was crazy as heck. We were asked not to come back, and the Apollo missions basically tapered off.
See, now you guys know why we never really kept going back to the moon and why after 1969, space was such a ridiculous buzzkill after that.
It's kind of like airplane design.
Yeah, I mean,
airplane designs are a buzzkill.
it's like
Why don't I have a hoverboard, Ben?
yeah, we have quantum computers, but no
I don't want a
hoverboard.
quantum computer. I want a hoverboard. You can give me quantum computers. You can't even give me a. How about you use that quantum computer to figure out how hoverboards work? All right, now that we told you all of this, Ben and I are going to have a little freestyle discussion on what we think happened with the footage you saw on the moon landing. We watched the whole moon landing footage.
3 hours.
It was 3 hours.
It's crazy.
And so we did a ridiculous amount of research for this. So we're also going to give you a bunch of resources to check into because we ended up watching a lot of peripheral funny stuff too.
Yeah, we did.
What do you think, Ben? Was it Stanley's footage that we watched or not?
My take on the whole thing is that I believe what we're seeing is probably the real moon landing. You're paying $1 billion for this mission. You have the Cold War going on. I mean, you're gonna, if you're the CIA, NASA, whatever, you're gonna come up with like every possible backup plan you can think of, right? And if
Exactly.
you just see Space Odyssey and be like, this looks like it's really in space.
Now, the thing for me is, after watching the entire 3 hours of the Apollo 11 footage, I mean, basically, they were in really good spirits, right?
Yeah, they are.
There's time discrepancies here, right? The way Corey describes this is that basically, like, they were probably in good spirits and then all of a sudden they got visited. The way Tompkins describes it is, well, on the way there, a ship starts following them. They basically land around the moon, the crater edge. We showed you that image, guys, right? So when did that actually happen and what did we see? Was it live? Was it not? Was it, I mean, this is kind of like what Ben and I have been trying to figure out, right?
My impression is like they wouldn't just land and be like, okay, here we are, we're gonna go live. Like my thinking is they would circle around the moon, right? And probably they already kind of figured out the location they want.
Well, not to mention, this is your first time on another planet.
Right,
Aren't you going to be a little careful and not just go out and be like, yo guys, what's up, I'm here?
Which is another reason why I feel like having Stanley Kubrick as a backup was so important.
Okay, and one of the strangest things, right, is when you're listening to those guys, you know, prance around on the moon surface. They're in really good spirits.
They are.
Now, there's only two ways you'd be in good spirits like that. One is if someone didn't visit you before you did that and you're not nervous, and the other is if you were just positive you weren't in any danger. Even though something happened, you knew you weren't in any danger and that you could kind of proceed and get the heck off, you know, you'd calm down a bit.
Well, and the other thing was, so they're on the moon for 20 hours. I had no idea
21.5 hours, you know, says some sources that they were on the moon. And what we saw was only 3 hours, right?
Right, exactly. So, I mean, what happened during that whole...
It's like 17, 18 hours of like non-filmed footage.
I think if you were filming something, I mean, first time on the moon, you would want to film everything possible. You would want to film it not live so you can have a better quality and show everything, right? This is what also other people have been telling us, that there's these Nazi moon bases
Yeah, it wasn't just cool guys like Tompkins who were building these spaceships, I mean, or building our own spaceships. It was like, you know, we had Project Paperclip and a lot of German guys that were over here.
Yeah, and it's like they already knew what was there.
Okay, so Ben, let's talk about one more thing, or one of a couple of things. And this is something called blank slating. So Corey Good mentions blank slating to David Wilcock.
Yeah, and Emery Smith talked about this too.
And Emery Smith talked about it too, right? Okay, so blank slating basically is when an astronaut comes down, their memories actually end up getting tampered with, so that if, you know, whatever.
Like Men in Black, like.
Yeah, maybe something like that, right? And what's interesting is that Ken Johnson actually talked about him going to some of his doctor friends to have them hypnotize him to figure out what he actually experienced in the as being an astronaut, right?
He did.
So this is a thing. I'm not sure about Buzz, or, you know, Neil's no longer with us, you know, but any of those astronauts, you know, there was that really mysterious footage of that astronaut just like collapsing when she was trying to speak, and
which
like,
was in our other video we had. So
we just don't know what these folks are going through or what's happening, right? But blank slating is definitely a thing. The Shining, watching The Shining was interesting, and watching 2001: Space Odyssey to see exactly how far Stanley pushed it. The shots were so innovative and stuff, but that story just made my head hurt.
So guys, what did you think of our video on Stanley Kubrick and what really happened on the moon? Do you have your own theory on what happened?
Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe for tons of more videos, and we'll see you out
on the edge. Yeah, so starting with, have you ever thought about my responsibilities? Is that a little loud?
No, do it, wait, do it like this. Have you ever thought about my responsibilities?
Okay.
Have you ever had a single moment's thought about my responsibilities? You gotta do like Jack Nicholson it.
Yeah.